In this video essay, I will explore how Tim Burton uses a more expressive approach to filmmaking in his 2007 movie musical, Sweeney Todd. I will explore the use of colour and how it is used to explore the mental states of the characters, the sound, production design, and acting. In order to understand how Burton uses more expressive approaches, we need a brief understanding of what these are. The expressive approach mixes formalism and attractions, while Gunning's theory, cinema of attractions, describes films in early cinema that disregard plot for visual spectacle and likens watching these films to being at the fairground. Expressive films still keep a focus on the narrative and use visuals to underlie and aid the plot. Tim Burton was inspired by German Expressionism. People critiqued the German Expressionism approach because it didn't represent the minds of the people, it represented the minds of the director.
He has become one of the most successful and sought-after filmmakers of the 90s, due in part to his eccentricities that helped him develop his creative vision.
Weirdos, yeah.
I know you are, but what am I?
Tim Burton's style can be seen throughout Sweeney Todd. The over-the-top costume design, backdrops, and colour scheme are evident throughout. Colour plays a major role in Sweeney Todd. Throughout the first half of the film, the majority of scenes have a cool tone, with everything coloured blue or grey instead of using natural colour and lighting. Here is a comparison of a behind-the-scenes shot and the same scene in the final cut, after these editing choices were made. This choice is not just a stylistic decision for the sake of style. Expressive approaches usually focus on the mental state of the characters, and visual decisions are made to support this over trying to create a vision of reality. Brown says that one of our most important tools as filmmakers is visual metaphor. Most of the darker scenes and cooler toned scenes have Sweeney Todd in them, whereas some of the scenes with Joanna and Anthony are slightly warmer in tone and lighter. We therefore understand these two characters as being good, in comparison to the protagonists of the film, Sweeney Todd and Mrs. Lovett, who are anti-heroes. This blue hue is also used in another way as well. Around halfway through the film, the tone of the film switches from cooler hues to darker, contrasting, warm hues. The colour in every scene is thought out to represent the characters and their emotions. The warmer, more intense contrast that comes later in the film represents fire. In the literal sense, it is because we can see the bodies being burned, and therefore the whole pie shop is shrouded in this eerie light, reminding us of what is happening under and above the store. In the figurative sense, the warm glow represents Sweeney Todd's rage and the havoc he is causing on the city, and during this scene we hear the lyrics, "City on Fire."
Quick, sir, run and tell one of all of the witches spell. There it is, the unholy spell. Get it to the Finland police as well. Tell them, help, fate, city on fire. City on fire.
This contrast of colour can be seen in other Tim Burton films as well, such as Edward Scissorhands, in which we have the cheery suburban world, with every house being a sickly pastel colour to represent the overly fake niceties of suburbia, and the lonely castle where Edward was isolated being very dark and cool to highlight how he was an outcast from society. The music in Sweeney Todd is very dramatic at the start. It is used to create a sense of dread and set the tone of the film. Approaches, every choice made is to enhance the emotions of the scene and is more over the top than usual. This music to any horror fan should sound very familiar. This is because the music uses the dies irae, which has been used throughout history dating back to the 13th century funeral chants and now by film composers to represent death or impending doom in music. It consists of the notes G, F sharp, G, and E. Here it is in The Lion King. Here it is again in The Shining. And more recently, Squid Game on Netflix. The Shining is another example of a film that implements expressive approaches and uses the dies irae in a dramatic way, as it plays loudly over the opening scene the same way it is used in Sweeney Todd. Both uses of the music creates a sense of doom and death.
My arm is complete again.
The ballad at the start of the musical was removed, and Tim Burton removed many formalist aspects to favour a more expressive approach designed for screen over stage. However, keeping the music at the start keeps the dramatic feel without breaking the fourth wall and feeling show-like the musical does.
Attend the tale of Sweeney Todd. He served a dark and a vengeful god.
Tim Burton, when adapting it through from stage to screenplay, didn't want to have a bunch of dialogue and then a song. He wanted the songs to carry the story and characters' emotions throughout.
People singing, but, we tried to avoid that kind of a lot of dialogue and then people bursting into song. And so to sort of deal with that, we cut out a lot of choruses. We cut out a lot of secondary people singing things and let, the main characters sort of project their feelings through the music. It's really coming from an internal place.
A lot of musicals can fit more into the attractions approach, such as Moulin Rouge, as when they stop to sing in this film, it feels very theatrical and has over-the-top acting, visuals, and sets. It comes across as much more avant-garde and is about the spectacle over the plot. One aspect of expressive approaches to filmmaking can be over-the-top acting. However, in an interview with Helena Bonham Carter, she describes how Burton was directing her to act less exaggerated, keeping hand movements and dramatic facial expressions to a minimum.
Asked me to bring everything back, not use my hands, real practical things. I hardly ever use my hands, which I found quite hard as an East End extrovert, to not use my hands. He said, no, it looks theatrical.
This was because the film could become too over the top and borderline silly, whereas the film seems more grounded due to the hushed tone of the singing and more naturalistic acting. As Sweeney Todd is an adaptation from a Broadway musical, and Tim Burton has expressed a dislike for movie musicals, Sweeney Todd, the film, therefore feels like a less normal musical as many of the tropes were abandoned. Also, due to the exaggerated costumes, setting, makeup, and the unusual genre mix of horror and musical, the acting was needed to counteract all of this to make the film seem more grounded and darker. If you compare the Broadway version to the movie, one major comparison to note is that the show is a comedy, whereas the movie feels like a horror with dark humour occasionally added in. Expressive films are maybe the most different to classical films through production design and mise-en-scène. Classical films do not want the backdrops, sets, or costumes to distract from the narrative. However, with expressive films, over-the-top costume design and set design play a major part. There are some directors in which we can recognise their films in an instant simply from the backdrops and mise-en-scène. For example, Wes Anderson's perfectly symmetrical and detailed worlds with a particular colour palette. Tim Burton is one of those directors that has a very recognizable style and personality within his film sets, settings, and worlds. Everything in Sweeney Todd is to add to the sense of macabre. It is less whimsical and fantastical than most Burton films, as it is to date his most violent movie. This scene has subjective perspective. We do not see what Sweeney Todd is seeing, but how he is seeing it. This scene is not focused on realism, as the people in the street aren't paying attention to him shouting in their faces, but instead it is focused on his emotions, heightened by the use of visual and sound. The lighting is dark with high contrast shadows, similar to the noir films of the 40s and 50s, which were also inspired by German Expressionism. And this scene highlights how Tim Burton expertly uses the expressive and subjective approach to create the characters, world, and story of Sweeney Todd.